I've told some of you about my time in Toastmasters, the group that helps folks with their speaking and presentation skills, especially people who are terrified to speak in public. Now, I was never afraid to be up in front of people. After all, I had minored in theater. Surprise. But I wanted to get better at extemporaneous speaking, being able to talk off the cuff without knowing in advance what I would be asked to talk about. I like to know what's coming up, be able to plan and process. I've told my more daring friends that, sure, I'll do last-minute fun and spontaneous things with them. They just have to give me plenty of advance warning. So you can imagine how current events in the world are affecting me. Having to reassess every day what I and we as a church and we as a society are doing about COVID-19, better known as the coronavirus. It is no doubt affecting you in a similar way. We're a bit anxious, we're a bit scared, we're a bit confused and not sure what to make of all this information coming at us. Much of it frightening and some of it contradictory. We want to know what's coming up and be better able to plan and process. Now, we have people in our congregation whose ages range from almost a month to almost a century. So the effects on our members and friends will also vary widely. Consequences will range from not catching the virus at all, to being asymptomatic, to catching it and getting over it rather quickly, to having very serious health consequences. Our church staff has been meeting more than once a week to keep abreast of what to do as the virus continues to spread. We are taking concerns seriously and erring on the side of caution. In the words of Los Angeles Times reporter Matt Pierce, I imagine all the closures and cancellations give people a sense of ominousness. But it's really an amazing act of social solidarity. We're sacrificing so we can give nurses, doctors, and hospitals a fighting chance. Start from there, and hopefully we can figure out the rest. And it's not just worrisome regarding our health. It also has sobering financial implications. Again, the effects on our city and congregation will be wide-ranging. Some don't have adequate insurance or paid sick leave. For those in some industries, work may dry up. Some won't have access to child care if schools are closed. Those who count on stocks and investments for income or the retirement are worried as well. This is why, during troubling times, it's good to be part of a community like this. We help each other during difficult times, as well as rejoicing with one another during happy times. Colin and I are here to lend an ear to your concerns. Let us know if you or someone you love falls ill. Your friends are here to help you out if need be. We will get through this together. Which reminds me of something the younger folks are taught to say as they're coming up through RE. Some of you may remember it or even know the hand gestures that go with it. Now, there's a couple different versions of it, but the one we say here at this church goes, "We are Unitarian Universalists with minds that think, hearts that love, and hands that are ready to serve." Because we are Unitarian Universalists, spiritual people with minds that think, hearts that love, and hands that are ready to serve, we are uncommonly situated to deal with this pandemic better than most. We can listen to the onslaught of information and sort through the hyperbole. We can use our critical thinking skills to rationally decide how to best protect ourselves and our family and friends. We can use our hearts to monitor the emotional toll this is taking on us and our loved ones. and reach out and support one another. We are ready to serve our community and each other by banding together and getting through this together. It occurred to me that these three things align perfectly with what I talked about earlier this month when I introduced the theme of compassion. Minds that think. Sympathy is the ability to recognize that a person is in pain. Hearts that love. Empathy is the ability to really experience some of their feelings. Hands that are ready to serve. Compassion takes sympathy and empathy even further. It compels us to put those thoughts and feelings into action, to actually do our best to alleviate a person's suffering. Compassion is love's response to pain. I had also talked about how a difficult part of compassion is non-judgmentally opening our hearts to the other, to avoid pity, to not look down on those who are suffering. We must remind ourselves that the person suffering is very much like us, except that they are going through a difficult time. Our instinct is to distance ourselves from the person in pain, so we can pretend something similar will never happen to us, because we're terrified that these things may happen to us. Viruses seem especially prone to cause the ugly side of our nature to surface. Chinese restaurants are being avoided by some people. Recent instances of xenophobia and anti-Asian racism and even hate crimes have escalated as people associate one ethnicity of people with the illness. The president, in his address to the nation, even referred to it as a foreign virus, as though it might need a passport to enter the country. Almost 40 years ago, HIV, the human immunodeficiency viruses, were first observed. In the worst conceivable case of blaming the victims, the gay community was both ostracized and decimated. Separating groups into us versus them began long before the 1800s, of course. There are countless examples, from the chattel slavery of the early United States to the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp 2 months ago, where over 1 million others, mostly Jews, were murdered, to the deplorable language used to describe virtually anyone with opposing religious or political views these days. Unitarian Universalism, being a covenantal, not creedal religion, doesn't separate believers from non-believers. We covenant with one another on how we'll treat each other. When we're at our best, we don't separate us from them. I say when we're at our best. You are just as good at othering those outside our liberal bubble, but that's an entirely different sermon. Many of my friends on Facebook are also arguably in this liberal bubble, but there are relatives and acquaintances from Toastmasters who are politically and theologically very different. Perhaps one might say 180 degrees different. One such acquaintance reposted an article from an institute that describes its mission as educating Americans on the value of personal freedom, free enterprise, property rights, limited government, and sound money. The article very much focused on the projected economic toll the virus will have, not the pain and suffering the illness will exact on people. My acquaintance wrote before her repost, praying for our nation and for people to accept the gift of salvation before it's too late. When I was a kid growing up in the Methodist Church, I remember hearing the somewhat scary story of Jesus separating people into groups, like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. The minister no doubt used this story to lend credence to his, and it was always a he, appeal for us to become saved in order to gain access to heaven. We were Methodists, not Baptists like many of my friends, so I remember hearing more about the carrot of heaven than the stick of hell. But the message was clear. The focus was on what was going to happen after we died. Hell was invented by the church in order to control people, according to the Right Reverend John Shelby Spong, a retired bishop of the Episcopal Church. I don't think hell exists, he said. I happen to believe in life after death, but I don't think it's got anything to do with reward and punishment. Now, obviously, I don't think that friend of mine on Facebook would agree with Bishop Spong. Years ago, when I first got a Facebook account, it asked for where I lived, where I had gone to school, and my relationship status. It also asked for a favorite quote, and I chose this one from the theoretical physicist Albert Einstein. A human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feeling, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Earlier this month, when I began our theme of compassion, I talked a lot about how we should do less of this separating from the rest, what Einstein called an optical delusion of our consciousness, and more of this widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures. Many great thinkers besides Einstein have described what Unitarian Universalists would call the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. From Thich Nhat Hanh to George Carlin to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 12th century Benedictine abbess and Christian mystic Hildegard of Bingen wrote, "Everything that is in the heavens, on earth and under the earth, is penetrated with connectedness, penetrated with relationship." And Catholic writer and mystic Thomas Merton said, "We are already one, but we imagine that we are not. And what we have to recover is our original unity. What we have to be is what we are." I find it fascinating that these Christian mystics are drawn to these themes of unity and relatedness, while so many Christians today seem more drawn to those instances of categorizing and separating mentioned in the New Testament. Sheep and goats, saved and unsaved, bound for either heaven or hell. Now, UUs tend to be less concerned about getting from here to heaven and more concerned about getting more of heaven down here by being in right relationship with those with whom we share this time and place, to widen our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. Like many of the first followers of Jesus, some UUs are more apt to put it, if you believe as Jesus, you can live well. Not if you believe in Jesus, you can live forever. And in the words of longtime UU Andrea Lerner, our faith is not interested in saving your soul. We're here to help you unfold the awesome soul you already have. It would be several hundred years before the contemporaneous followers of Jesus would turn their attention from living well on this earth to a focus on the next world and onto creeds and doctrines, and to separating those who believed as they did from those who didn't. I fear this separating of goats and sheep, the saved and unsaved, the godly and the worldly, got way out of hand a long time ago, and this focus on who is like us and who isn't has defined much of our world for centuries. Since Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in AD 325, down through the white nationalism masquerading as Christianity in today's America, there have been those on the correct side of religion and those doomed to eternal suffering. Susan Frederick Gray, president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, writes, "Our Universalist ancestors didn't believe in hell, except for the ones we create here in this life. What would it mean to show up in the places where suffering and violence, persecution and inhumanity prevail, and to bring an active, powerful form of love that affirms dignity, liberation, and peace? Or, put another way, if we as a culture and society have helped to create hell here in this life, we can work to eradicate it by loving the hell out of this world." Which, of course, is the theme of our stewardship campaign. And I only bring this up because today is the end of the campaign. And I want to remind those of you who haven't turned in your pledge cards to do so. As I said earlier, there's a range of people with varying financial concerns here in our congregation, especially in these uncertain times. But I hope you're still able to support us with a pledge. And amid all else going on in the world, it remains Women's History Month. Earlier, I quoted the 12th century Benedictine abbess and Christian mystic Hildegard of Bingen. 900 miles away and 200 years later lived the English anchorite Julian of Norwich. She wrote the earliest surviving book in the English language to be written by a woman, Revelations of Divine Love. She was a child of the Black Death, being 8 when it swept through Norwich. She also survived the Peasants' Revolt and the Lollard persecutions. And yet, despite these tragedies, if you have heard of her, it is probably because of this one line from her writings: "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." I wish I could know the questions I will be asked ahead of time and plan for future events now, but I can't. I wish I knew how long it will be or what we will have to go through before all will be well, but I don't. This time of intense difficulty will hit some of us harder than it will others. But we are here for one another, and we will get through this together. We are to recognize those ways we are alike, not try to find ways that we are different. Our task remains to widen our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Because we are Unitarian Universalists. We show our sympathy with minds that think. We show our empathy with hearts that love. And we show compassion with hands that are ready to serve. Amen, and please be well.